So usually I do a lot of these panels. I usually moderate, like, I don't know, last year I think I did 13 or something like that. And they asked me, go through the list, who do you want to talk to? And I'm like, the only person this year I haven't talked to is Fabian.
I appreciate that. That's because I'm not out that often. So
Exactly.
So these things. They asked me if I wanted to do a one-on-one panel. I'm at the age and the point where panels are usually excruciating for me.
Yeah.
If anyone came to yesterday's Age of Apocalypse panel with Scott Liddell, you actually saw the ice picks being pushed into my eyes.
Well, I think that's
but when you said
any
a one-on-one,
panel
they
that
told
you
me a
do
one-on-one.
with Scott Liddell, it's ice
I
pick.
love Scott. I just don't want to talk about it.
No, I love Scott.
When they told me to do a one-on-one, I said, wow, poor people in the audience are going to have to endure an hour of me talking. So, okay,
Well, have a stand-up routine that I test out on the audience.
Uh-huh.
I'm kidding. This guy knows. So no, I mean, for me, I grew up in the 90s comic era. I sold tons of your comic books, and it was one of those where I take this as a chance to just meet the people
Cool.
I really enjoy. So we just sit here and talk. If you guys have any questions, you want to talk about stuff, we're not talking about Deadpool.
We can if you
I'm
want
kidding.
to, but there's
I'm
plenty
kidding.
of opportunities to talk about Deadpool
I'm
and other
kidding.
spots.
Yeah, no, but I just wanted to talk to you about your career.
Let's do it.
All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, Fabian Nicieza. Did I get that right?
Not even close.
Really?
We started with a mispronunciation of the last name. Excellent. That's definitely a regular
How
pattern for me.
okay.
How do you think I
how
pronounce it?
how often do people murder your last name?
It's not even a matter of how often. It's just they murder my last name,
Oh.
and they have been since I was 6 years old.
Okay, so
from the very first day of elementary school, actually I don't even remember that because I was learning English, so I have a memory loss of like all first grade. So from the very first day of second grade, I have lived a life of my name being mispronounced. So I'm totally used to it. What I've done for a long, long time is I just have fun with it. I turn it. I say, how do you think I pronounce my name? And that's what you have to then do, pronounce my name. And depending on the mood I'm in will determine how excruciating I make it for you when you continue to try.
I heard it was actually nice and easy.
That was Glenn
That was
Herdling.
what
Glenn Herdling was an editor at Marvel who purposely in the letters page kept telling people the wrong way to pronounce my name. So it was Nicieza, it was nice and easy. He might have done Nicieza one time. So he just purposely kept doing it. And I'd have people come to me at conventions, and Fabian Nicieza.
So what is the correct pronunciation?
You have to try it again.
Nicieza.
It's Spanish, so Fabian Nicieza.
Nicieza.
Nicieza, just as
I
it's
would
spelled.
never have gotten that.
But
My
it's-
white boy
It's an American thing, honestly.
Yeah.
I'll have people from Italy or from France or from Spain who pronounce my name flawlessly.
Yeah.
So Americans, no offense to you Americans, unfortunately I'm also one, but you're kind of dullards about other languages. So,
Yeah, for sure.
I do enjoy the aspect of watching people struggle to add those extra consonants to the name.
But
Consonants that aren't there, but you're watching the gears grinding as they're trying to add that extra N into the back of the name, which isn't there.
This furthers my theory, though, that the more screwed up last name is, the easier it is to get into the comic book business.
You know, if Bill Sienkiewicz can make it in this
Exactly.
industry, then anyone can. Has nothing to do with talent. He only made it because of his last name.
Exactly, because it was so unpronounceable.
Yeah. People said, let's give this poor kid a break.
Did
His
you guys
art is
ever work on a book
kooky.
together?
Let's give him a chance.
Did you guys ever work on a book together where you guys could just be speaking unpronounceable names?
I hired Bill to do promotional stuff for me when I was Marvel's advertising manager, but I was not of the rarefied air that would have the opportunity to work with him. That'd be phenomenal. I can't aspire to that. But I hired him quite a bit to do promotional stuff for me when I was Marvel's advertising manager, and he did some just knockout gorgeous paintings, which unfortunately, I always had to tell him to rein himself in because they were for promotional purposes, so he couldn't get too kooky. He couldn't be too Sienkiewicz with it, because actually that would shift you away from the core audience you were trying to hit at the comic book shops.
Did you do those Power Man ads?
No, that was before my time.
Was it
Power
before
Man
your time?
ads were
I was
like
trying
a
to
year or
remember.
two before my time. I started at Marvel in '85. I became the advertising manager in '86.
So how did you get your start? Well, let's go back.
I was born, I came out of my mother's womb.
Did you
Unless you
go
don't want to go
to
back that far.
school to be a writer or anything?
No,
When how did you
half
find
and
out?
half. I went to college at Rutgers in New Jersey, and I was a communications major with a public relations and advertising track. There was like 4 different tracks you could take, and I took public relations and advertising. There's also an English minor, which let me write a lot and read a lot as part of my course load. And I finished my major requirements and my minor requirements by the time I was a first semester senior. So I was actually able to just jack off for my entire senior year by taking courses. I'm sorry, I said senior year. By taking courses that I felt like taking. So I took a bunch of history courses because I love history. A course on castles that this guy was great because he had visited all these castles all over the world, and basically was this teacher with 10 of us in class with a slide projector showing us the pictures of the castles. And I also took a lot of writing courses. And I had the good fortune at Rutgers that they had a lot of good courses to take. So I took a television writing course, a poetry writing course, not that I was ever going to be a poet, but I wanted to take a poetry writing course, a short story fiction writing course, a journalism course, which wasn't for journalism major track. So that's what I did almost my entire senior year. And most of my senior year, my roommates will attest, was spent with me with an IBM Selectric electronic typewriter, which weighs like 100 pounds, on my lap, sitting on the floor in our apartment, watching TV until 4 in the morning, writing. And hoping that they were just drunk enough to not hear the sounds of the electric typewriter. And that's what I did. And then when I got out of college, I promptly was rejected for every single job I applied for at any ad agency, any promotions agency, any public relations agency, because I didn't type 60 words a minute.
Shut up.
Yeah, everything was administrative, and entry-level administrative was about being able to type for some reason. And I got so discouraged in the interview process that it got to the point where I would just rewrite their typing tests because I didn't like them. So I handed it back to the people, and they'd start looking at it, and then they'd look up at me, and I'd just say, see, and I'd leave, right? And then I got a job at Berkeley Publishing in the production department. Berkeley was a paperback book publisher. At that time, it was Putnam was the hardcover division, Berkeley was the softcover division. And the production department is kind of like the one level above the mailroom in terms of entry-level salaries. My first salary in my first job was $9,500 a year, which is actually like below poverty wage. And
so about how much a comic book artist and writer could.
Yeah. Now to this day, it's entry level now for me.
Yeah.
And the guy who hired me, and I'll never forget, he said, "If you're still doing this job in 6 months, either you suck or I suck." And he said, "Let's figure out which." Right? It was great. And the other colonel he gave me in that interview, which wasn't really an interview, he just wanted to make sure I didn't drool in front of him before he hired me. He said, and I'll never forget it, he said, "Publishing is an incestuous business. You move up the ladder by leaving the company you're at and coming back 2 years later at a higher salary. So that's how you do it." And I said, "Okay." And then he said, "If you're still here 6 months from now, either you suck or I suck." So 6 months from the point he hired me, I got a job, offered a job in the managing editors department upstairs, which got me out of the production department. Managing editors basically trafficked everything between editorial and production, whereas production trafficked everything between managing editorial and the outside typesetters and print houses. So I did that for about 1.5 years, 2 years, and one of the people I worked for and then worked with was a woman named Beth Fleischer, who ended up becoming Mrs. Chris Claremont. And Chris was writing a novel for Ace Books at the time, so I didn't really get to meet him, but I knew he was doing that. And I liked the job a lot. It was a lot of fun. I was making inroads, and my goal was to start writing paperback books for their series that they do. They did really tacky Nick Carter spy series and Gunsmith westerns, and another western called Long Arm, and all of them were borderline softcore porn series. So every episode,
right up your alley.
Yes. Each book always had like 1 or 2 mandatory sex scenes in it, and then the rest was just Western adventure or spy adventure. And the level of craft required for it was not Pulitzer Prize material.
Which
But I figured you got paid either anywhere between $500 and $1,000 for a book. I was like, okay, and you get experience and you learn the format.
Yeah.
You're learning how to work under pressure. You do 12 a year. Maybe I get to do 1 or 2 a year. Okay, so that was my goal, and that was how I was thinking I was going to break into writing. And then, as always happens in publishing, a friend of a friend had a sister who was looking to hire someone at Marvel, and I found out about it, so I applied for the job and I got it. And that was as an assistant in the manufacturing department of Marvel Books. Marvel Books was not trade paperbacks and hardcovers like it is now.
That was when they used to do like the novelizations of Spider-Man.
No, not even that. That was after that.
Oh, really?
And that was actually outside licensing. Marvel Books division was actually created as a result of a licensing deal they had with Fisher-Price Toys. And they created a whole bunch of coloring books, pop-up books, activity books, all based around Fisher-Price. And you have to understand, Marvel was run by James Galton at that time and Mike Hobson. They were old world publishing.
Yeah.
And in many ways to them, and Mike Hobson is a dear friend and a phenomenal human being, but they didn't have a love of comics, you know. Even to that, at that time, by 1985, it was a little bit of a slumming thing. Comics were low rent, and they were always looking to legitimize themselves in their own minds and among their own social circles. So a Fisher-Price book line is a way to almost offset those tacky superhero comics that we do that sell 500,000 to 400,000 copies. And we also did Marvel's press posters. Marvel used to do these 22 by 34 large, beautiful posters. This was not even promotional posters. These were for sale art press posters.
Yeah.
And I did the manufacturing on that, so I got to know Bob Budiansky, who was the editor and responsible for those things. And my office was right next to Virginia Ramita's office. She was a traffic manager for production, so I got to see John Ramita come in all the time. Her assistant was Len Kaminsky, who sat right outside my office. Len Kaminsky became a writer for Marvel a few years later. We were the same age.
What year was this?
85.
Oh,
We're
wow.
both entry
So
level.
that was that era.
Shooter was editor-in-chief. Editorial was starting to really hit the wall with him, and the revolt was simmering and brewing.
Were you the one that
New
wrote the
Universe.
memo?
What?
Were you the one that wrote the memo?
No.
Okay, so just so you guys get a heads up, if you guys haven't read the Marvel the Untold Story,
Yeah, that's how it's called. Yeah.
it's like Game of Thrones.
It was actually a very often told story. I had a problem with the book.
Yeah, I know,
I think Sean
right?
did a good job overall, but I had a problem with the
It's
book
like the
title.
Game of Thrones for the comic book industry. There's so many different people that run around in this thing, but it's an incredible story. It's an incredible.
My problem with the book is that each chapter could be a book.
Exactly.
And as a
Exactly.
result, as exhaustively as Sean tried to research it, I mean, he interviewed me for 44 hours. He still gave short service to so much because he was trying to cover so much.
And that's one thing I did. Like I feel like the Shooter era could have been its own book.
I'm not kidding. Every chapter of that book could have been a book. And I'm lucky in that I bridged the '70s guys into the aughts, and
That was what I was just
I
gonna
was
ask
in
you
this
about.
middle fulcrum point where it was becoming more of a business, becoming more hype. The talent was becoming more hyped and self-hyping.
The 80s were like the toy era of the really like Secret Wars, pushing comic books, pushing toys
and
and
expansion of crossovers and all this
Exactly.
stuff. And it was also an era where we started to treat it more like a business. We tried to be more professional in our presentation. We tried to be more professional in how we generated and created our presentations, promotions, advertising, convention displays, convention presences. We were starting to get out of the 70s drug pallor and get into a bunch of kind of post-Reagan or through Reagan era a yuppie business professional mentality. And it was an interesting divide to see that. Because
what was the energy like back then?
The energy in the first year or two of Marvel was very, very nervous, very tense.
Really?
Direct sales did not like editorial. Editorial did not like direct sales. Editorial didn't talk that much to licensing. Licensing wasn't doing enough. So editorial was frustrated by them. For licensing said, you're not giving us enough to license. So international publishing existed in a vacuum and no one saw a penny from them, and creators were like, do we get any money for this stuff? You know? And it was really interesting, because when I took the job as the advertising manager, I actually took a pay cut at the company to take the job as advertising manager, because I wanted to do that job. It's what I went to school for, it's what I really wanted to do, I loved it, but I also knew that it was a job that would get me into every single department in that company on a regular basis.
Yeah.
I was not going to be someone who was anchor bound to his desk, and I did. My job made me have to interact with every department, which was the best thing in the world for like a 26-year-old to do, because I got to know everybody. And I used to have a cute butt, I don't anymore, but I used to have a cute butt, so a lot of the women sexually harassed me, and that was okay too. Bounce a quarter off that sucker. So, so I got to know everybody. I really did. And direct sales started hiring a couple other people, a guy named Lou Bank, and all of us were in our 20s. All of us were a little more personable. All of us dressed a little more professionally. And by that I just mean we wore a shirt and tie with jeans or slacks. We didn't look disheveled, and we didn't look like a mess. Although some of us still had mullets. So we it was the 80s. It was the 80s. What are you going to do? And that also meant I got to know editorial. And I got to know them in a different way, because their experiences with direct sales were not positive. They didn't get along necessarily that well with Carol Kalish, who was the head of direct sales. They didn't get along that well with Peter David, who was the direct sales manager under Carol. They didn't get along that well with the guy who had been doing a lot of the promotional work on his own, named Steve Saffel, who I became advertising manager. Steve became promotions manager, so I took aspects of his responsibilities away from him. He wasn't happy at first, but it all settled down, because when I moved to the promotions department, I was becoming Steve's assistant technically, but he was getting a boss hired over him that he didn't know. So this guy was going to create a department, and we ended up being like a 4 or 5 person department. And I got to interact with everybody. And I was doing advertising and promoting all the comic books, but editorial saw me as someone who was less of a threat or less of a pain in the butt, or could bridge the gap and communicate better between the departments. There was still a lot of problems between editorial and shooter. This was when your universe was kicking into high gear. The company was very nervous because no one in the company thought it was a good idea to promote our 25th anniversary by launching a new universe of titles. Nobody, the creators didn't like it, the editors didn't like it, direct sales didn't like it, nobody liked it, but we had to do it.
And that was like, it was yours kind of like, baby, and
yes.
It was the whole thing. You guys actually did commercials, like television commercials for that. And
yeah, we really direct market video commercial. The direct market could slug its own name into the end of the commercial and buy 3 in the morning. It was during 10-second
in LA,
spots.
it was during the reruns of Star Trek.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. We did a lot of stuff. Listen, I came in. It was a great time. I came in when one of the first things I had to do was help write the copy for a cash register program for the direct sales market. And I thought, okay, that's exciting. So how do I make a cash register sell sheet exciting or fun? And what I found the most entertaining about it was the vitriol we got from retailers who were furious that we were trying to get them to co-op a cash register. I mean, we would give them credit in comics for the cost of the cash register that we'd be giving to them, basically. Marvel would purchase the cash register, we would give it to them, and then we'd give them co-op cost in comic orders, right? So ultimately, it's free for me. Yeah. No, because that was Marvel trying to control the sales of the retailers. And I'm not kidding, guys. This wasn't 1 or 2 fringe guys. This was a solid half of the retailer base thought that Marvel was trying to control their sales by selling them an electronic cash register. Because somehow there'd be someone in an office at Marvel with a keyboard going, let's shift all these sales over to Cloak and Dagger. So, sayonara, Superman. There you go. it was so I learned this level of paranoia, but it was ironic because the level of paranoia out there towards Marvel was very, very similar to the level of paranoia within Marvel about itself, right? And I'm like, this is a hornet's nest of like fun activity, right? And then New Universe hit, and New Universe failed, and it was the greatest failure that ever could have happened to me because I got my first writing assignment.
That was your first
as a result.
Yeah,
I got
DP7, right?
to show you how Cypher.
Cypher,
To show you how
sorry,
desperate they were. I got stopped in the hall by Bob Budiansky between running from one office to another, and Bob Budiansky was an editor on a bunch of New Universe titles, and he said to me, "You want to write, right?" And I had sold an inventory story to Jim Owsley, who's now Christopher Priest, who was the editor of the Spider-Man titles. I sold a Spider-Man inventory story, which I was thrilled about. And inventory stories were stories that were completed and shoved in a drawer for when the regular creative team screwed up or needed a month break or vacation or whatever. You'd have an entire issue ready to just slot into the schedule, and it buys you a little bit of time on the schedule. So every shooter's demand was every book had to have an inventory story always in the folder, in the drawer. So if you use one, you gotta get another one commissioned. And Spider-Man used to have to use them a lot, luckily. So Jim commissioned a Spider-Man story for me. I sold it, and then Jim got fired as editor. And the new editor was Jim Salacro. And I waited. The comic has the plot been signed yet? No, and the artist is drawing it. I waited for months actually, and then at one point he goes, I don't like that story. We're going to give you a kill fee. So my first sale was a kill fee, a Spider-Man story that never got drawn. So Budiansky said, "You want to write, don't you?" And I said, "Yeah, sure. Eventually, I'm going to write." He goes, "You got any ideas for Cyforce?" Sure. It's almost like if you remember the Martin Short character he used to play on Saturday Night Live, the smoking cigarette guy, all nervous and sweating. That's what Bob felt like when he's talking to me about this. And I go, "Yeah, no, absolutely, I know Cyforce." He goes, "Well, pitch me a couple ideas tomorrow." And I said, "All right, fine." And I go home and I go, "Shit, I got to read the first 3 issues of Cyforce," which I hadn't read them yet. The 3 issues had been published at that point. They were so far behind on the schedule. This thing was such a cluster F. Clusterfuck. I'm not adulterated Deadpool, I'm a PG-13 Deadpool, sorry. That they were desperate enough to be asking the kid advertising manager who'd never written a story to come up with some ideas by tomorrow for a book because they were so late that they may need that story next.
It's not about talent, it's about being the right place at the right time.
Partly, yes. Now I hope here comes the talent for it. I gave Bob 11 ideas. I wanted enough to give me 2 full pages of ideas.
Like the 12th one.
They were all 1-paragraph blurbs. So I was summarizing my story neatly. That was my advertising manager and copywriting experience, helping me out. And then I gave him the can't-must conflict of the issue. Because Shooter had a rule. Every story had to have a can't-must conflict, which is really good for writing in general, but when you try to shoehorn something into a story that doesn't necessarily have that, it feels forced.
Can't-must conflict?
I can't fight the Green Goblin because I must go get Aunt May's drugs for her, or she'll die. So every issue had to have a situation where the hero was placed into a can't-must conflict. Like I said, philosophically, it's a really good thing to try to do in your writing. In practice, sometimes it feels forced. So I gave Bob the can't-must hook for each story idea. I basically handed it to him on a platter. This was golden because he could tell Shooter, and here's the can't-must conflict. And Shooter would go, okay, you know. So I handed him into Bob in the morning, and I went back to my desk. I was on 11, and I didn't have an office. I sat on a desk outside, International Publishing, and Steve Saffel sat in an office. We were a divided department because we weren't really an department yet. And at the end of the day, it was like 6 o'clock. Bob Budiansky comes up and he's holding the things in his hand, and I'm thinking to myself, oh shit, right? And he comes and he goes, you did a really good job with a lot of these. These were really good. Can we do this one first, is what he said. And I said, I'm thinking to myself, yeah, baby. I go, yeah, I can do that one first. So I went home, I started plotting it, and I was living at that point with Mark McKenna, who was an inker and had been a Romita Raider, which is an art correction guy. I was living with Kevin McGuire, who was a Romita Raider and was this close to launching himself on Justice League. They moved into my house in New Jersey because my mom moved to Cincinnati because that's where my dad's job took him. So I kept their house, the house I was in since 7th grade. I lived in with Mark McKenna and Kevin McGuire in Jersey. It wasn't as much fun as it seems. And because I had to take a bus every morning and commute into New York, so I'm up at like 6:30 in the morning every day. McGuire didn't quite understand that. He thought it was going to be like party all the time. Go to work. And I went home, I told them what happened, and they said, great, cool, you sold your first story. And I go, well, I haven't written the plot yet. So I wrote the plot, and I handed it in, and I did my job. This was a couple of days later. It took me about 3 days to write the plot. And at the end of the day, 6 o'clock, Bob Budiansky comes up, and he's holding the plot in his hand, and I'm thinking to myself, oh shit. And he goes, has anyone else offered you anything yet? And I go, what? He goes, did any other editors offer you anything yet? I go, well, no, I talked to Bob Harris about maybe doing a codename Spitfire inventory story. Yes, we're scraping the bottom of the barrel, okay? And he goes, well, before he offers you anything, tell me. And I said, well, we're just talking about, I haven't even bounced any ideas off me. He goes, well, just before you tell him anything, talk to me first. And I said, okay, I had no idea. I was clueless. I had no idea what he was talking about. I go home, and McGuire and McKenna are going, he's going to offer you the book. He wants to offer you the book, and he can't yet, but he wants to offer you the book, so he doesn't want you to take anything else. And I'm like, no, that's ridiculous. I just handed in one plot. He goes, no. And sure enough, like 2 weeks later, the shooter cleaned house on a bunch of stuff. I sold a second inventory story to Bob. Shooter cleaned house, canceled 4 of the titles, and Shooter said, this kid is going to write this book. And Howard Mackey was now going to be the editor, not Bob Budiansky.
Oh.
So here I am, forced onto a new editor as the writer of a book who is clearly Shooter's golden boy, who had yet to talk to Jim about one story kernel at all, right? And all of a sudden, I'm Shooter's golden boy. And I'm thinking, oh shit, I'm in trouble, because I don't want to be Shooter's golden boy, because Shooter's not going to be here very long.
That's
And if I'm Shooter's golden boy, then once he's gone, not a single editor is going to want to hire me. And
welcome to Game of Thrones.
Shooter got, and we have our first New Year.
You can't be House Shooter if you're going to be House.
Yeah, no, you can't. No, you really can't. You think how poor Tom DeFalco, he was Jim's executive editor, and he had to bridge that on a daily basis, being the editor's friend and trying to keep
House
Shooter.
DeFalco always pays his debts.
The Shooter we had a New Year's meeting. There was only 4 titles left, so there was 4 writers, and Howard Mackey was going to edit all 4 of them. And I'd already given Howard a synopsis of what I was thinking about I wanted to do with the book. And Shooter said, this is what we're going to do. We're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to kill this character, which was the lead character in my book. And I'm like, what do I say? What do I say? Do I say anything? I decided not to say anything. And Jim Shooter got fired like 2 days later. And listen, this sounds bad about Shooter, and I don't mean it to, because I do respect Jim tremendously. He's an incredibly intelligent guy, and he's a really, really good writer and really, really good with story. But everything that makes you a good editor-in-chief, 9 times out of 10, ends up making you a bad editor-in-chief after you've been there long enough. And Jim had been there long enough, and I think it's a job that has like a 5-year cycle.
Yeah.
Quesada is the only person on the planet Earth, I think, who has ever survived that 5-year cycle and thrived and gotten another job within the company outside of editor-in-chief, because every single editor-in-chief has ever quit or gotten fired, period, right? Except for Joe.
How long has Alonzo been there now?
I don't even know. 7 years?
Yeah.
8? I don't even know. And Axel probably won't get fired or quit either. It's a different dynamic right now than it was then.
It's just funny that mold's been broken, for sure.
Yeah. So Tom became editor-in-chief. The tone and feeling of everything in the company went like this.
Yeah.
Just like that. It was as if, the clouds part and the sun comes down.
I was at a convention that I want to say it was San Diego, and it was the Marvel panel, and they started out with, so we have an announcement, and everybody's like, Jim Shooter is no longer with the company, and the entire audience is like, yeah! Like, it was a party. It everybody knew that was going to be
It's
the change for
It's
Marvel.
funny, and it's kind of sad in a way too, because the guy really saved the company. He saved the company through tyrannical and dictatorial demands that everyone be more professional. He saved the company. Quite frankly, by saving the company in many ways, he also saved the industry. Because Marvel and DC are inextricably in a lot of trouble too. And Shooter changed the entire structure of the editorial department and turned it into a professional publishing organization, which it absolutely had not been in the 70s. All right, it was crazy fun. I mean, I grew up reading comics in the 70s and the black and white magazines and all the cool stuff they were doing, but it was a friggin' mess, man. You cannot justify the amount of reprints that would appear on a regular basis in ongoing books. I still do not forgive Steve Englehart, although I've forgiven him to his face. I haven't in my heart. That issue 150 of Avengers was half of a reprint. After a year-long storyline was supposed to culminate in 150, I was like 15 years old, and I said, "Son of a bitch, it's half of a reprint," So that changed under Shooter, and there's positives and there's some negatives to all of that. I get all that, but the very things that made him an excellent editor-in-chief ended up being part of his downfall. It becomes hewn in granite, and when you become unmoving at that level, eventually your foundation is going to crumble beneath you, which is exactly what happened. The foundation of support crumbled beneath him because his editors and his creators started to defect. They couldn't support him anymore, and that's what happened. So it was cool. It was fun.
Well, again, welcome to Game of Thrones version of Marvel Universe. So you're at House DeFalco at that point.
Yeah, I'm advertising manager still. Tom's editor-in-chief. Mark gets promoted to executive editor. Archie, had Archie left yet? No, I don't think. I think Archie had left already, I think. And Carl Potts was named editor-in-chief or executive editor.
Late 80s, right?
What? Late 80s. Late 80s. It's about 88, I think.
So when did you start
really?
Because
I got the monthly Cypher skit,
like
and I wrote it for 16 issues, and then I thought it got canceled, which all the New Universe books got canceled. But it was, by the way, it was selling 40,000 copies when it got canceled, which would make it like a top 5 book right now. And all the books got canceled, and I thought, no problem, I'm going to get another writing assignment because the reaction to the work I was doing on Cypher was very positive, and I got nothing. So I had to start pitching and scrambling again. I started to do a lot of inventory stories. So there's an issue of Daredevil that's mine, and there's an issue of Doctor Strange that's mine, and there's an issue of Iron Man that I co-wrote with Glenn Hurdling, and there's a bunch of annual backups. I called it my year or two of scut work. I was just scrambling to find writing work. I had a full-time job, I had a gig, but I wanted to write too. But I always wanted to do both. Then a couple things happened. Number one, Tom wanted to get Kevin Maguire back any way he could. Kevin had a choice. Kevin had a choice to either do Justice League or to do Silver Surfer. And he loved Silver Surfer, and he loved the idea of doing a book in space because it would mean he'd have to draw very few backgrounds. But he ended up doing Justice League, which was great for his career, but I think he would have done a great job with Silver Surfer too. And Tom wanted to get Kevin back because Tom didn't like the idea of losing a reader. Kevin was a Bermuda Raider. He was in the office for like 4 or 6 months doing art corrections and all this crap, and he wasn't very good at it because he couldn't emulate somebody else's style. But it was clear, it was obvious how much talent this guy had. Amazing. He did a Power Man face cover. It was just Power Man's face snarling on the cover, and Power Man and Iron Fist was the book. And the pencils were just absolute works of art. They got passed around at the office where people were going, look at this thing. Can this guy draw a monthly book? No freaking way, but look at this thing. And Tom said, how do we get Kevin back? And I said, I don't know, Tom, let me ask him. And I said, Kevin, how do we get you back? And he'd already been doing Justice League for a little over a year. And Kevin said, I want to do something with Captain America. And I said to Tom, we want to do something with Captain America. And
Kevin, will it only come back if I write a book?
We started to percolate a Captain America limited series that was going to be basically out of continuity, and it was going to be Captain America the movie, because Kevin is a movie guy more than a comic book guy, so we wanted to make it Captain America the movie. And we started to percolate that at the same time that Marvel Comics Presents was starting to happen. Marvel Comics Presents had over a year and a half of schedule advance time to load all those weekly 8-page stories into the schedule. So those things started to happen. So everybody and their cousin, me, every assistant editor with their son, you know, the guys from the mailroom, everybody was trying to pitch an 8-page Marvel Comics Presents story. So the Kevin thing is starting to percolate, although it's not a real thing yet. Marvel Comics Presents stuff, I throw a list of 10 different stories with 10 different characters, and then Terry, the editor, says, do these two. Okay, off I go. And there's this new book that Tom DeFalco and Ron Friends developed that Danny Fingeroth, who just got back on staff, who, by the way, was the writer who got fired off of that Cyforce, and I became the writer. Danny's going to be the editor of the book, and I want that book because that's Marvel's Teen Titans.
Exactly. This is the conversation I wanted to have.
That's the book I want, and that's the book I should be doing, and there's no one else who should be doing that book but me. That's how I felt from the second I heard about it. I went to Tom's office, not Danny's office, because I wasn't there yet with Danny. He would look at me, and I'm sorry, what am I supposed to do, dude? You know, you wrote a crappy book. I said that to him after our relationship got really good. I said, hey, you were writing a crappy book. They offered it to me instead. I went to Tom. I said, do you got that Bible? It was called The Young Warriors at that point. And he said, yeah.
Young Warriors, not a Young Avengers?
No, not Young Avengers. No, I think it was Young Warriors. And he gives me the Bible that he typed up, just a couple pages and some Ron Friends character designs. And I took it home, and I said, I want this book. And I talked to Mark Gordon. See, I was friendly with Mark and Tom from a business relationship standpoint, a convention standpoint, not as a writer-editor relationship. Mark had hired me to do one solo Avengers story. But Mark was a tough nut to crack as an editor. I could tell great stories about Mark all day long, but one of the stories is him and Howard built a platform like this high in their office. And they put their desks on top of the platform, all right? Then they took the legs off of the couch that they had in their office. Every editor had a couch in their office, right? Howard and Mark took the legs off, so the couch sat even lower. And the couch was really soft, so it sunk into it. So Mark and Howard would sit up here, all right? This was Howard and this was Mark. And you, to do your business with him, would have to sit down there, and you'd sink even more. So you were in a completely, no offense, ladies, it's like you're in the obstetrician's table ready to deliver a baby. You're just down. Like, you're like this. And I'm pitching him solo Avengers stories, and Mark had a way about him on purpose, and I learned later it was all a gag. At the time, I hated his guts. He didn't look at you. He didn't acknowledge your existence. Howard would just look at him and nod to you, but they were playing a game. Life was a game for them. Reality was a game for them. It really was. And I'm sitting there pitching and tossing ideas, and Mark is pretending to be doing something. Howard told me all of this later. Well, Howard would go, move on to me, and I would go, okay, and I go, Wasp story, and I see Mark stop pretending to write, but he doesn't look up yet. I go, Wasp has to fight Red Ronin. Red Ronin was a 70-foot tall robot, and Wasp is a tiny little character. And Mark looks up and he goes, write it up. And he looks back down again. And then I go, okay, and I keep going through my list, and Howard goes, like you're done, go. Right? So I go, okay, and I get up and I leave, right? I found out later, I didn't know at the time, but they did that to everybody, partially as a test. They did it to Kurt Busiek, one of the greatest stories ever in the history of stories. Kurt Busiek was trying to pitch an inventory story to them, and Mark and Howard both really liked the inventory story. It wasn't about that, it was just about jerking Kurt around. They scheduled a meeting after delaying him and canceling. Kurt was the direct sales manager at that time. Peter had left to go freelance, Peter David, and Kurt took his position. They finally scheduled a meeting with Kurt, and Kurt was going to come in, let's say 3 o'clock on Tuesday. So Kurt was all ready to talk the story through and everything. And Kurt, and I love Kurt, and Kurt's a great friggin' writer, but there's rarely anything that you can say in one paragraph that Kurt couldn't say in 6, right? So he would really tell you everything. They purposely they purposely told everybody in the office to come in and interrupt Kurt with pretend business. And they would have to stop Kurt and pretend to do business, okay? And they had about 12 or 14 people
Sounds like an ongoing Saturday Night Live skit.
came in and interrupted Kurt, and Kurt was getting more and more anxious. Howard said he's getting flop sweats, and it was all a game because Howard, they loved the story and they were going to play it all along. They just wanted to manipulate a human being for no reason other than the ability to manipulate a human being. And
With power comes great responsibility.
If you hear it, you want to hate them. If you know them, you want to hug them, because it's just phenomenal. It was just great. So I was just part of that social experiment among many, many that I got dragged into unknowingly, usually, from Grunwald.
So back to Young Warriors.
New Warriors. By then, within a couple weeks, the name had changed to New Warriors, and Danny's accepting pitches. And Mark Grunwald told Danny to accept a pitch from me. Read it. I want to know what he does, because they wanted to see what I was going to do with this. And I gave him a pitch, and that pitch was pretty much beat for beat what the first 2 years of New Warriors were. Pretty exact. And I gave it to Danny, and I knew that I had nailed this thing. It doesn't happen that often creatively. It really doesn't. But you know it. And Danny proceeded to not make a decision for 6 more months. Okay. And I work in the office, so it's like torture. And I'm asking Mark.
Oh, I pitched on it too, so you know.
Did you? You were waiting too? I'm asking Mark, when's he going to make a damn decision? This is ridiculous. We're actually getting to the point now, from a promotion standpoint, my job, where I got to know this stuff because we're starting to plan the next year's cycle of coordinated promotions. Yeah. So we got to have a creative team. You're burning your schedule. You're burning your lead times. Now I'm throwing the advertising manager hat. Harum, getting angry, but it's really the freelancer hat. It's called son of a bitch. And we had half-day Fridays too back then. They don't anymore, but we used to have half-day Fridays. A lot of publishing did. What half-day Fridays honestly meant is you left the office at 1 and you went to go see a movie or you got hammered. So, did I say hammered? I meant to say shit-faced. So I went to half-day on a Friday after he told me he was going to make a decision by the end of the week. So I waited, and I went to him like around 1:15, 1:30. Everybody was starting to go, we'll meet you at this bar, we'll have lunch, blah, blah, blah. So I go to Danny, I go, end of the week, and he goes, I know, I'm sorry, Fab, I am. And by this point, he and I were okay, because I'd already interacted with him a lot on my job level. He goes, I got a line on a hot writer from California that I really think could really turn this book into something unexpected. And I said, okay, advertising manager hat on, okay, if you got a line on a good writer who can really make this book sell better, I get it, all right. You know, I can sell the shit out of a good book by a good writer. So who's the writer? I can't tell you. You can't tell me? No, I can't. All right, fine. I went out. I met everybody at a bar called the Rodeo Bar. It's not there anymore. And everyone's like, hey, how's it going? I go up to the bar. I go 3 shots and 3 beers. And I never do that. I just don't do that. So I had 3 shots and 3 beers in like half an hour, and I was gone. I was shit-faced for the day, right? I'm 27 or 28 at the time. The hot writer I found out much later, no offense, and God rest his soul, was Steve Gerber. Steve Gerber is a lot of things, but in 1989 he was not a hot writer from California who should be writing a team of teenage superhero characters for Marvel. Steve is a lot of things. Steve is a lot of amazing things, but that's not one of them, you know? So the advertising manager hat came on, and I'm thinking to myself, that's not a hot writer from California who can sell this book. I can sell this book better than that. And
again, no offense to Steve Gerber, at that point he was killing books more than anyone else.
Oh, it's, from a sales standpoint, all his writing was still excellent. It just wasn't, the sensibility wasn't quite there for what the audience was
for that
looking
era,
at
that particular era.
So Danny obviously finally, through attrition more than anything, I think it was like nobody else really wanted it at that point, offered me the book, and Mark Bagley was going to be the artist. And I said, thank you, asshole. And I went ahead and I started to write. Now, we had 6 issues in the can before the first issue even came out.
Wow.
That
That
doesn't happen
happen.
anymore.
Yeah.
It didn't happen that much back then, but we had 6 issues in the can. One of the reasons is because Mark Bagley was capable of drawing a book in 2.5 to 3 weeks.
Wow.
The other reason is because I wanted this so badly for so long that I'd already broken down pretty much every page of the first 5, 6 issues.
Are there
You know?
new Warriors fans out here? Yes? No?
Fools! All of you fools!
You can all leave right now. We're just gonna have a personal conversation. No, seriously.
No, seriously, you're fools! It was a very, very good
It
book,
was
honestly, to this day.
fantastic. I grew up on Teen Titans,
Mhm.
you know, in the 80s. I do a podcast actually where we, I haven't read Teen Titans since the 80s, and a friend of mine has never read it at all, and he's like 25. So
Fool! A fool!
exactly, so we go and we recap all of this and stuff, and I think we're gonna do the same thing with the Warriors, because it's such a great book.
Yeah, and I talked to a lot of people about the Warriors. Look, it's a book that Marvel didn't even know how to sell. I'm the advertising manager, and I had to fight the direct sales manager on how to sell this book. She was going to retailers saying, it's like Young Avengers, it's like Police Academy, but for Young Avengers. And I'm sitting next to her. She said this a couple times, and I can't contradict her in front of all the retailers. But I'm seething inside because she's killing my sales, because I know that's not what it is. The reason I knew that is because I was writing the damn thing and we had 6 issues in the can.
It was Marvel's Teen Titans.
Yes,
It was-
and
it had
I would
that
then talk to the
classic
retailers off to the side.
Yeah.
Listen to what Carol said, all right? She hasn't even seen this book. She has no clue what it's about. This is what it is. And I tell them, I go, oh, okay, all right, that sounds a little better than what we thought it was. The first issue sold 125,000 copies in the direct market, and it sold about 75,000 copies in the newsstand, okay? So the first issue total sold about 200,000 copies. The 12th issue sold about 195,000 copies in the direct market and about 110,000 copies on the newsstand. Right? So that book went up in sales from issue 1 to issue 12, which didn't happen often at all back then. It still doesn't happen now to this day. So I knew that we were doing a good book that people were talking about, but it started as a bit of an underdog, and the running through line that we had to say is, it doesn't suck like you think it was going to. You thought it was going to suck, but it doesn't suck. And people who read it would literally go to me at conventions or whatever, because I was just starting to have to do comic signings as well as the promotion stuff. They'd go, this didn't suck like I thought it was going to. I go, that's our copy line, that's our ad line for the book, you know?
I mean, at that time I was running a comic book shop, and I mean, we poked the hell out of it because it was the book that we identified.
You're the store, thank you!
I was 16, 17 at the time, you know, the book came out and I was like, wow, this is the book that
I was only 19 at the time. So.
Yeah, so, you know, it's like, at that point, you know, it's like, it was that book that was, it was the Teen Titans for my generation.
Yes.
And was that what you set out to do? Or was that kind of the...
No, yeah, you know what, it wasn't, listen, there's no doubt that the whole thing started with Tom and Mark deciding we don't have Teen Titans. New Mutants isn't Teen Titans because it's part of the X world and it's very different. We don't have sidekicks because our heroes don't have sidekicks, so we can't do the same kind of thing. But Tom and Mark said, well, we got some young characters, let's pull some out of our asses and turn them into a book. And they grabbed a bunch of characters, and if you look at some of those original characters, they pulled them out of their asses.
You made Speedball cool.
And I made Speedball cool, but I'd already done a couple inventory stories with Speedball, and I actually got to work with Steve Ditko on Speedball, which was phenomenal. And Steve Ditko never said it to my face, but apparently he said it to Terry Cavanaugh, that he liked the story I scripted off of his plot, and was willing to draw a story that I had plotted myself. Wow. I was like, oh man, that's great. I never got to meet Steve, which really disappointed me. He was in the office a lot, but Steve isn't, not because of him, but it's not his fault, but he doesn't project himself as the guy you want to approach, right? And I was hesitant to do that, you know, but I'm also an idiot. I had a chance to meet Jack Kirby, and I declined because it was at the height of the Marvel art return controversy, and I felt very awkward working for Marvel.
Read the book.
But at the same point, I didn't get a chance to shake Jack Kirby's hand and tell him thank you. You know, I know Stan, and I've gotten to know Stan. I've done a lot of work with Stan. I've had dinner and lunches with Stan, et cetera, et cetera. So I've had that privilege in my life, but not having directly acknowledged Ditko and Kirby is something that I always regret now. You know. You grow up, you're 6, 7 years old, you don't think that you're going to get to work with Stan Lee and John Romita, you know. I still, my wife will tell you, every year she just goes, oh really? I get a Facebook happy birthday from George Perez and from Walt Simonson. Now I've known these guys for 20 years, but getting a happy birthday from George Perez and Walt Simonson every single year still makes me go, I got a happy birthday from George Perez. And my wife is like, oh, again? You do this every year. I know, but it's George Perez.
I don't understand. Oh, my wife used to do the same thing. You know, every now and then.
So New Warriors succeeded. Danny offered me Alpha Flight because he wanted me to try to perk that book up. And I didn't.
You did.
I did. I didn't like Alpha Flight at all, but I took the job because I wanted to prove to them.
Really, it's a great series.
So I wrote Alpha Flight for 1 year and then I quit. And again, I don't have that many regrets in my career. I've been really lucky. That's another regret. That I'd always planned to out North Star as gay. I felt that was a through line that had been percolating in the book in subtle and not so subtle ways for a long time. And I'd already talked editorial about it. They'd given me the green light to do it, contingent on how I was going to do it. And I introduced the supporting character into the book, who was going to be revealed as North Star's boyfriend. And then I quit the book before I ever got to it. And I shouldn't have. I should have stuck with it and done that, because then I could have been the guy who did that. Instead, it was Scott Liddell having a character go, I'm gay! Like, and, that was it. And when I saw that in print, I honestly almost cried, because I just
it's
felt...
It's not the way you would have done it?
Oh. No, that wasn't the plan. Maybe my plan was too subtle, because it was just going to be two guys, saying hi to each other in the scene. And that was it. It was just a relationship. You go home or you go on a date and you don't enter the restaurant and go, I am gay, to the guy you're having dinner with. You just sit down at dinner and maybe kiss him on the cheek and say, how was your day? That was going to be basically it, and I didn't get to do it. So that was definitely a regret. But I quit Alpha Flight because I felt no real affinity for the characters or the concepts. Danny asked me to do a job, which was restructure it, remold it, and I felt I did that, and I was done.
And that led you to this book, New Mutants?
Yes.
Something around that?
I've done a couple.
Now, my story was, what I heard was Rob wanted to write the book and they wouldn't let him.
No, actually, to the best of my recollection, Rob and Louise were having increasing friction between the things Rob wanted to do and the things Louise didn't want to do with the things Rob wanted to do. And Bob, as an editor, was getting caught between a rock and a hard place. And Bob, as an editor, was doing what Bob did too often, which is not make a decision and avoid conflict and allow that to continue to deteriorate. And it deteriorated in a very inevitable and obvious fashion. The editor was going to pretty much have to side with the guy who was bringing truckloads of creative energy and increased sales to the book over the veteran writer who is a wonderful human being, one of the most wonderful human beings on the planet, and a really, really good writer, but had already been writing the book, I think, for almost 2 years now, and sales had gone down. So
that's the next title. If the next title starts to go down,
you don't want next titles going down. Yeah. So Bob basically forced Louise off the book, is what it amounted to, because I think, and my memory's not great about a lot of this stuff, and I also if I wasn't actually there, anything else was hearsay, but second, third, fourth hand. I think that Bob may have asked Louise if she could just script the book off of Rob's plots as a way to try to balance that, and I think Louise said no. And then Rob was offered the chance to plot it, but Rob said that he didn't want to script it yet because he had just written something for Marvel Comics Presents, and it was a lot of work. It was more work than he felt ready for. He's 21 years old, right?
Exactly.
And writing is a craft that should and usually does improve with age. So I'm going to be a pretty decent writer by the time I'm 80. And Rob and I had already had communications. We were already friendly. He wanted me to script the book, and I was interested in that because I wanted to get my foot into that X door a little more, because there was everything else, including all the characters I love, and then there was X sales. right? And I wasn't as big a fan of the X-Men and what it had become over the previous 10 years or so. I was a huge X-Men when I was Cockman,
Yeah.
early stuff, but I wasn't as big a fan of what it had become. But I was a fan of how it sold, because that was really good royalty
At that
checks.
point, it was 400,000 books or something?
At that point, it was about 400,000 total. So I wanted to get my foot into that door, you know? And I scripted New Mutants, and obviously, you know, we did New Mutants 98 and went from there. Rob wanted to relaunch it as X-Force, and the only people in the company that were supporting him were me and the direct sale, the manager of direct sales promotion, marketing, who was a guy named Sven Larson. We had to convince Bob. Once Bob got on board, he had to convince Tom. Once Tom got on board, we had to convince Mike Hobson. Once Mike Hobson got on board, he had to tell Carol Kalish of direct sales that yes, this is what we're going to do. We were canceling a top 10 book, even though New Mutant sales, and New Mutant sales had jumped ridiculously with Rob on board. It was selling almost 100,000 copies more than it had been. And we were saying, we want to cancel this book and relaunch it with a new number 1. And they did not want to do that. And we pointed to McFarlane's Spider-Man the year before, and they still were wary of it, because that was a very different sort of a creature. What I think helped is the fact that they decided to relaunch a new X-Men book with Jim and Chris doing that. The minute they made that decision, it was easier to decide to do X-Force as well, because it was going to then be part of a publishing summer. So it becomes part of a publishing program that you can pump in a slightly different way. And we knew it was the right thing to do. Rob was 100% right. The book was changing in tone and style. This was a demarcation point. I wasn't sure 100 was the perfect place to stop it. The Mutant Mutants concept was no longer viable.
There was no longer
what this book was going to be. Yeah, and we knew it was going to sell more, because if you put an X in front of it, alphabetically it's going to get racked with the X-Men, and it's just going to do better. We didn't think it was going to do the 8 million, 6 million copies, but we knew it was going to do better.
8 million copies, right?
Was it 8? I think it was 8. I don't, honestly. All I know is that issue 2 still sold like 1.5 million copies, which was ridiculous. And issue 3 sold like 800,000 copies. So and nobody could complain about sales attrition, because the sales were still ridiculous for quite a while. And I'm not equating sales with quality. I really am not. But what sales are is an indication of interest, for sure, you know, and there was obviously a lot of interest. I feel the quality caught up a little while later, but the interest was there from the get-go. Can we do this for another 6 hours?
Chris is looking at me saying,
yeah,
get the hell off the stage.
We've just gotten up to 1991.
We could have done, we need to do those.
Sorry, I talked too much. I think eventually I may want to write a book, but my problem is I forget too much.
That's why you make it up.
Yeah, right. That's what all journalists seem to do.
Thank you guys so much for hanging out with us and listening to us babble about the old days.
Anybody got a quick question so they'll really get me in the back of the room? Anybody got questions? Anybody got a question?
One question.
I'm going back to my booth too, so I'll be there as well.
Yeah, please come by, say hello, and get some stuff signed. Ladies and gentlemen, Fabian.
Thank you very much.